some senses, I'm going right out of my comfort zone talking about Handel. You know, it's positively avant-garde compared to a lot of music that I deal with. But I also teach a module on music and disability studies, and we talk about madness and the way that madness is presented in music. And so I wanted to kind of delve down into that a little bit deeper, and I will actually be building on what Colin was saying. I think it's really interesting that Colin has brought up that this 17th century opera is the first time that Orlando's madness is set in music, because what I have found is that up until the should I do this? Would this be better? Is that generally it's the women's madness that's set to music until I suppose this point, and I'm not entirely sure why that is, and I don't really want to go down that road, but I think it perhaps is something we might talk about in a moment, because actually, in literary terms, the male madness is there all the time, but not in musical terms until this opera. So. And this is perhaps because of this close musical association between madness and lamenting, and that women lose it when they're bereft, when they're abandoned, and that could be what it's all about. But I'm going to take you forward to Handel's Orlando. Sorry, it's fine. It's like the older assistant. It's like, my charming assistant. Hello. But we're moving forward in time to Handel's Orlando. It's first performed in 1733, and in a way it shows what can be done. I suppose this is really only about 50 years later, when the rules around Baroque opera have solidified to a point where the audience is so familiar with them that Handel can go about breaking them in really quite extraordinary ways. When Ellen Rosanne talks about this piece, she says that the portrayal of madness exploits and subverts the assumptions of stylistic decorum on which it's built. So the audience has to understand, as Colin said, the stylistic rules in order for them being broken to make sense. So I want to play you, in fact, a video of a wonderful production from Zurich Opera in 2007, conducted by William Christie. But I'll do that in a minute. I just want to give you a few pointers so that you can spot how the madness actually happens. The plot of Handel's Orlando is much more loosely based on Orlando Furioso, but the essence of Angelica and Medoro remains. It's one of these operas that really just concentrates on that part of the story. There's no Bradamante, there's no Ruggiero. And it really concentrates on that, on this love triangle. We're on a little bit more solid ground with the 18th century, because harmonically we understand most of Western music is based on the musical language of the Baroque. Still understand that better than, for instance, the musical language of Olympia's Lament that you heard earlier on, or the Merlo set of the Badalamenti Lament. So we can understand a little bit better harmonically when things aren't going as they should. But structurally, here, I just wanted to give you a few more pointers. What I need you to bear in mind as you watch the clip is that Baroque opera, it operates on a very simple formal division between the speech substitute recitative, which is literally reciting, and that contains most of the action and the dialogue of the opera. And these arias, which are the moments in which the characters reveal their psychological motivations and their thoughts. And arias are often in this three-section form that Colin mentioned, the ABA, the da capo aria. So you have the A section where the problem is stated, and then you have the B section, which is where all the psychological information and all the working out comes to the fore, and then the A section is repeated as a kind of final, well, yes, this is how I'm going to deal with this problem. Recitatives have generally a very irregular rhythmic structure, and arias are regular, whether they're slow or fast. And this is that stylistic decorum, and it rests on understanding those elements and very little more. So what Handel gives us breaks those very simple rules. The recitative and the arias are all jumbled up, slow and fast, regular and irregular. And at one point near the beginning, just as Orlando is unraveling in what he calls the black waves, you get these stumbling scales in 5/8, which is almost unheard of in the 18th century. And in the final aria, that isn't really an aria, he gives us a very particular music when Orlando's saying to Angelica, who he thinks is Proserpina, the queen of the underworld. He says, no, don't cry, and it's a very strong theme. And then he gives another theme to, yes, you better cry because I'm really, really angry. And then the theme for no, don't cry comes back, but he uses the same words, yes, do cry. So he's jumbling up and actually breaking these rules in really quite remarkable, they're very, very noticeable ways for the 18th century audience. And just as you think you're getting drawn back into that toccato aria, he goes off in a different direction, so the audience is really quite unsettled. And if you're a bit more clued up on Baroque opera conventions, you might also notice that Orlando, which was written for the alto, for the castrato sestino, is given a bass aria, that is where the voice sings the bass line, but as he enters into hell in his mind, but he's actually singing it on above. So again, this is a familiar structure with a very unfamiliar, unsettling twist. So here is the production from 9 years ago, Zurich Opera, conducted by Laurie Stras, with Mariana Mijanovic as Orlando and Martina Yakova as Angelica. And another thing that you might have noticed when when Orlando laments in the middle of that scene, it's with all the markers of a female lament as well, with these descending chromatic bass lines. So he's just, what Handel does is just take all the expectations that you have of this of recitative and aria and just sort of throws them up in the air and puts them back together again in this strange way. That's really all I have to say.